You're listening to episode number 29 of the Nightingale podcast. On this week's episode, I am doing a stat segment on external validation. I talk about what is external validation, what areas of your life are you maybe looking at external validation as a form of boosting your self-confidence, and how do we even begin to stop this terrible habit. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And as always, if you are loving the Nightingale podcast, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast and leave a rating or review. Not that I'm seeking external validation from these reviews, but really it's a great way for me to know if I'm on the right track, and also for you to give suggestions on who you would like to see on future episode in terms of what types of nurses, as well as what topics you'd like to see discussed on the podcast. So thank you all for listening, and let's dive into this week's stats segment. Hey friends, welcome to the Nightingale podcast, a podcast for nurses, future nurses, and, well, anyone interested in the nursing profession. I'm your host, Dakota Felkowski, RN, BSN, and DNP student. Join us each week as I interview nurses from all areas of the nursing profession to uncover nursing opportunities that you may have not known even existed. You can expect to be inspired and maybe even a little bit motivated. The goal of the Nightingale podcast is to encourage you to think outside of the box, step outside of that comfort zone of yours, and reach for a fulfilling and unique nursing journey. So let's dive in and check out this week's guest. You never know, they may just have your dream job. On this week's episode of the podcast, I wanted to talk about a topic that has really been on my mind lately as a student, as a wife, as a woman, as a nurse. Just in every realm of my life, this topic applies, and that's the topic of external validation. And I thought it'd be great to start the episode out with just a quick Google search of what comes up for external validation. And that is, a person gains a sense of self-pride when others approve of their behavior, work, thoughts, etc. He or she needs someone or something to show that they are good at something and are good enough. How many of you can literally raise your hand at the fact that they have needed external validation in some form of their life? I definitely can relate to this because I think it's prevalent in every aspect of my life, as I was talking about before, and it's something that's really subconsciously done, and it's something that I think we need to create more awareness about. So I'll give you a few examples of where I see needing external validation or seeking out external validation in my life, both at home or in school or at work, that sometimes we don't think about. And I'll talk about it in just a few minutes about what is this doing to us? Like, what is this need for constant approval? What is it doing to our confidence? What is it doing to our self-worth? What's it doing to our ability to step outside of our comfort zones and to seek out new opportunities? Because we may think that it's not affecting us as much as it actually is. So let's talk about in our personal life. So one of the first examples that I can think of is for this in my personal life is the topic of kind of self-help and losing weight. So over the last year and a half or so, I was a student during this time, and it's so easy to obviously not take care of our health. So I was working out and eating better, and what started to happen is obviously I was losing weight because of this, and it was intentional, and I started to get this feedback from other people. People started noticing that I had lost weight, and they kept on commenting about it and saying, wow, you look really good, and just things like this. So what happens when people start to notice this is that I start to need this validation to promote my confidence. At first, it didn't start out that way, right? So at first, I was feeling good about myself on my own, but then when other people started to notice, it it reiterated that I was doing the right thing. I was showing progress. And what ended up happening is that when I would be around new people, I would start to kind of seek out that they said something. I wouldn't ask them to say something, or I wouldn't bring it up. But if they didn't say something, weirdly enough, it started to make me feel like, oh, have I gotten off track? Have I gained weight? Blah, blah, blah. And this is so distorted way of thinking because, first of all, I didn't do it for anyone else. I did it for my own health and to just feel confident for myself. But what starts to happen slowly without even realizing it is that you seek out that approval from other people and you start to need it or require it to boost your own confidence. So that's an example in my personal life. It's not for shallow reasons. It's not done just to, to brag or to promote that I am getting in shape or anything like that. But this is a real life example I think that a lot of people can relate to, is that you do this subconsciously, that this started out, I was getting these compliments totally out of nowhere and I wasn't expecting it. So then I started to require it. So that's one aspect in my personal life. Another aspect is as a student. So as a student, I have kind of gotten in the habit of asking my preceptor, like, if they have any feedback, So I would, at the end of my clinical day or the end of a semester, I genuinely wanted to hear, how was I doing? Do you have any room for improvement? But what I've noticed is sometimes I, as a student, will do things and I'm wanting that recognition. It always feels good to get that recognition, but it shouldn't. The problem when you are wanting that recognition to increase your confidence, to requiring that to be a better student, So you have to watch this fine line of, do I need this to perform well? And if that's true, or am I seeking out this advice just to boost my ego? Am I seeking out the compliments of my preceptor to say, yeah, you're doing a great job? Or am I truly wanting the feedback? Because this is something that I think is really easy to do. And again, none of these examples is like an overt and in your face example of someone, oh, they're definitely seeking out this attention or this feedback. I don't think that's the case. I think these are things that are done very subtly and things, like I said, that are done subconsciously, that we are needing that for our own validation. And the problem with this is that we start to require it going forward. If we build these habits of having to have someone else validate our feelings or validate how good we are doing in school or validate our knowledge with patients, then we can't do that for our own, and we're going to continue to need that going forward. And the problem is that's not healthy, and that isn't something that is creating a sense of self-confidence. It's creating confidence based on someone else's opinion of you. And so I noticed that I was doing this with preceptors, is that I was doing something really well and I'm almost hoping that they'll give me a sense of congratulations or acknowledgement that I did well, versus I know in my heart that I did something good. I don't need that back, right? So I don't need them to tell me that was a good catch or great diagnosis or great management plan, because I know that that was a good management plan. So that was another example. And the third example is kind of going forward in as a nurse or as a nurse practitioner, needing that validation in our workplace. So you stepped out of the student role and now you've transitioned into needing some external validation from your peers or from your preceptor or from your management team. So I noticed that I am the type of person that was also needing this at work. So I would have a crazy busy night, and if someone, sometimes I didn't feel like I was being acknowledged for it, or just asking for providers kind of feedback on things. And what I realized is that that also wasn't serving me, and it wasn't serving my ability to do things based out of my desire to just do them well. And so I want to talk about the topic of external validation, not because it's something that I personally struggle with, but because it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with. And like I said, this is not something that is super in your face. I think this is something that's very on the down low and in our heads, and something that doesn't get expressed very often. So how do we switch it? How do we change it? And I think the biggest way to change this is self-awareness. So being aware of why you're asking questions or why you are doing things. So in terms of me as a student, why am I asking my preceptor if I'm doing a good job? Why am I asking her to evaluate me? And am I asking her because I want that validation, because I want that praise? Or am I asking because I truly want to change? And I believe that it's a little bit of both, but I think it's being aware of what are my intentions behind this? And is it serving me? Do I need that validation from this person? And is this person's thoughts or their expressions of what we're doing, are they even worthy? Are they even important in our career or our success as a student? Because sometimes we get so hung up on what this opinion is or what this external validation is. If it's not good, it's really killing it's killing our confidence. If it is good, in a way, it's kind of killing our confidence because we continue to expect it. So I think that the biggest way that we can overcome this is by being aware of what are those questions that I'm asking, and why do I need that? Because if it's something that is not serving you in a good way, if you're asking these questions or if you're seeking out this feedback for just your own personal way to boost your confidence, that is not the best way to go about it. The best way to go about it is to just keep it internal and to show up for yourself to do this work. So with me working out, it is not serving me to need this acknowledgement from other people that I have lost weight. It's serving me when I feel good, when I feel that I'm at a comfortable weight, when I feel that I am healthy, that I'm eating well, that I have higher energy. Like, that is what's serving me the most. And so as a student, what's serving you the most is those personal wins. They mean so much more when you can acknowledge it yourself and you don't have to sit around and wait for someone else to offer that acknowledgement or that acceptance of what you're doing is correct. And same goes for at work. So we have that's why we have employee reviews and employee evaluations every year. So you're going to get your feedback at those times. So throughout the year, why are you going to pressure yourself to show up for a preceptor or show up for your manager just to get that self-recognition? Because if you're doing something wrong, someone is going to tell you, or it's going to come out at one of those meetings. So in order for you to boost your own confidence, it's creating this sense of self-confidence and self-reflection that is going to kind of reshape how you think about things and how you go into this type of experience. Because if we continue to mold ourselves into how we want to think and act going forward surrounding these situations, then we've kind of laid down that ground line for going forward. But if we continue to always, as a student or in our personal life, want this external validation, that's setting us up for every single aspect of our lives needing this external validation from our families, from our spouses, from our partners, from our bosses. And like I said before, it's not serving us. It's not serving us to need that patient satisfaction survey in order to feel that we provide good and well-rounded patient care. That's not always going to happen. And so we need to be able to recognize our own accomplishments and to go forward with them. So I this topic has been on my mind for a while now, and it's something that I think we all can just bring more awareness to. And I hope that you can continue forward in just reflecting back onto your own ways that you are seeking external validation and kind of start to shift them. Like I said, the first thing and the only thing you really can do is bring awareness to this topic and say, yeah, I am doing this. I have noticed that I've started to seek this validation out, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's obviously in human nature to want that. That's why we have these reviews, that's why we have evaluations, but it becomes an issue when it's all the time, and it's hurting our own confidence when we aren't getting it on a daily basis, because it's just not realistic to constantly get praise or to get acknowledgement for the good things that you're achieving. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Going forward, I would love any suggestions for future stat segments. And if you would leave those in your review section of the podcast, or send me a message at the Nightingale Podcast on Instagram, that would be so beneficial going forward, just to hear what you would like to chat about on the podcast. And as always, if you're loving the Nightingale Podcast, go ahead and subscribe and share this episode with a friend if you think it'd be beneficial.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Nightingale Podcast. If you enjoyed this week's episode, make sure you subscribe so that you are getting weekly notifications when the new episode comes out. And while you are there, I would really appreciate you leaving a review, and maybe your review will be featured on an upcoming podcast. You can check out all episodes at thenightingalepodcast.com or on Facebook at The Nightingale Podcast.